deepen my soul.
Welcome to Strong Love Speaks. This is our very first episode, and we promise you a very exciting show where we will be getting down into all the discussion about love, sex, dating, relationships, and marriage. I am Denise.
I'm Gabriel.
And we've been doing this for quite some time, working with you, working with couples, singles, on all the issues surrounding relationships. So this evening, our very first episode, we'll be looking at the issue of relationship vulnerability. Now, there's so much happening today, Gabriel, with respect to relationships. We've been married for how long?
It's been 41 years, and I will let you to define what you just said.
I will. I'm just setting the back.
Please.
I'm just setting the backdrop. We've been
Yes.
married for 41 years, and during our marriage, we got married in 1984.
Yes.
And we had lots of books and magazines about love, about marriage, but there wasn't this amount of discussion on relationships. There was focus on the family. There were some other programs perhaps that dealt with love, sex, relationships. We had some very good books.
Yes.
We belonged to a couples group. But there was not this much discussion about relationships as we are finding today. And in 2008, we felt very strongly to start something new, something different in Barbados that would really challenge people to make their marriages, their relationships, even their dating experiences better. So Strong Love Speaks is that platform. And this evening, we're looking, as I said, we're looking at relationship vulnerability. But before we get any further, we need to define what relationship vulnerability is.
Please.
We hear a lot about being vulnerable and about the need to be vulnerable. And when we think about being vulnerable, we're really talking about being open, about sharing, having a desire, a passion even, to expose oneself, not being afraid to empty one's feelings or one's emotions. And but we're not talking about just random vulnerability, or we're not talking about just going out there and talking all of your business, but we're looking at it within the context of a relationship. That's why we've pegged it relationship vulnerability. And we've found in our own relationship that vulnerability is something that we keep seeking. It isn't something, I believe, that you say you have it and that's it. I think as we go through the various seasons of our lives, vulnerability will look different because we're going to come into a better understanding of ourselves and of our relationship the longer that we're together. At least in any best case scenario, we would think that the longer a couple is together, the easier it is for them to be open with each other, right, Gabriel?
Yes, most definitely.
That is what we would think.
That is what we would think. But I believe that it is something that you have to be deliberate about. You have to be intentional to create that kind of atmosphere between the two of you.
Right, so it isn't something that I believe is as automatic as we think it should be or it could be. And I mean, we're Barbadian, we live right here in Barbados, we live in the Caribbean. We know that we have a particular culture. And Gabriel, I'm setting this, I'm going somewhere with this. In 2023, 2 years ago, we brought out our book, actually, perhaps exactly 2 years ago, because it was in June, wasn't it?
Right. That's right.
We brought out our true love story, Journey to One. It was a wonderful experience writing that book, publishing it, and sharing it with others. But what were some of the responses, Gabriel, that we got when we put that book out there?
Some of it was very alarming to me, right? Because persons wanted to know, are these people for real? Mm-hmm. Are these people mentally, something is wrong with them? Mm-hmm. That they're talking this way? Mm-hmm. Some people even said, listen, we need to talk to you.
Yes.
We need to come together and talk.
Yeah.
Because I think it is not something that is readily advocated in books, especially in a Caribbean setting.
That's right. The whole idea of being vulnerable. We were actually very vulnerable in writing that book. Not only vulnerable in terms of the audience, and the audiences that would read the book, those who've read it and those who are still to read it. But we were actually vulnerable with each other, because the process of writing that book was one where, it happened, as some of you might have heard our story. During COVID, we obviously got closer.
Yes.
I was working from home. I didn't have to get on the road, so my husband and I could spend a lot of time, in my office. We did devotions on mornings before I started the day. And during that time, we spent a lot of time reminiscing, reflecting, talking about our lives, talking about God, talking about where we wanted to be in life, talking about our goals, our dreams, our past, the mistakes we'd made. Both of us did this, and it really opened us up more to each other. I mean, we were already very close. We were already in a very good space in our marriage in 2023. No two ways about it. That's just 2 years ago. Well, we probably wrote the book in 2022. But we were already very, very close. We had already navigated a lot of the challenges in our relationship and come out on the better side. But still, that time allowed us to go deeper still, to go back and to reminisce and to ruminate and to expose ourselves to each other. And that is what vulnerability is. It isn't something that you do in your first or second or third or fourth year of marriage and then you never have to do it again. It is something that is continuous, and you have to keep building it so that you become even closer. But we're going to be right back as we look a bit deeper into what vulnerability really is. So we started off by obviously introducing ourselves and our topic, relationship vulnerability, for those of you who've just joined us. And we talked about the fact that vulnerability really is about that willingness, that passion, that desire to expose oneself, to be open about sharing one's feelings, one's deepest emotions, one's dreams, one's plans, even one's trauma. It's really about that willingness to just lay it all out, to be open about the things that are important to us. And I think that of all of the areas that are important for a successful marriage, relationship vulnerability for me comes right up there in perhaps the top 5. There are other areas that are important that we're going to be looking at as we move on down in this podcast. But relationship vulnerability comes up there in that top 5 because if you're not willing to be vulnerable, if you're not willing to be open, if you're not willing to share it all, then it means that you're closing off a significant part of yourself from your spouse. You're closing off a significant part of yourself from your partner. And what I find with people who are willing to be vulnerable is that they're actually perhaps in a very healthy space, emotionally and mentally, because to be vulnerable with you, Gabriel, I have to be open with myself. I have to be reflective. I have to be honest. I can only be vulnerable with you to the extent that I'm honest with myself. And if it's difficult for me to be honest with Denise and to see the areas where Denise needs to grow, where Denise has messed up, where Denise has failed, then if I keep areas of my life closed from you, then I can't grow and we won't grow in a particular way that we should, that we won't grow at all. We could still grow, but something will be left out, something will be held back.
But when you say that, you must also bear the understanding that relationship vulnerability, sometimes I think it is so easy for women than it is for men. So whereas you would, we've been together for a while and we have reached a level where we've become vulnerable with each other, but it is not something that was achieved overnight.
No.
And it is not something that myself as a man, I happen to let it just happen. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of painstaking, from me to be able to be outspoken with you in relation to a lot of things. And that is from a man's standpoint.
And there goes the name of our book, Journey to One.
Yeah.
It was a journey, and it is a journey. So the whole issue about being vulnerable with each other, as Gabriel said, it doesn't occur in one fell swoop.
No.
Even for me as a woman, we often say, as Gabriel said just now, you know, women, we are socialized differently. Our parents raise us differently, generally speaking. The society treats to us differently. Women are usually the ones, you know, we have the little girl best friend when we're children, you know, our little girlfriend that we tell everything to.
That's
you know,
right.
We walk arm in arm at school, both at primary school and at secondary school, and even college, university. We walk through life with a very close, or with a group of close female friends. And we are able to speak to them. I'm speaking generally, all right, because we know there are always exceptions, but generally speaking, women are able to relate very well. Perhaps our mothers or our grandmothers or our aunts, maybe they spoke to us differently and sought to find out how we felt about different things that happened to us. Or even if we didn't have that kind of close relationship with our parents or with the people that raised us, I think the society provides enough examples, enough experiences for us as women to be able to share how we feel. And because we tend to be more emotionally in tuned, I think a part of that is nurture in terms of how we are raised, but a part of that is also nature. I think that God has imbued women with a different type of experience and a different way of dealing with and expressing emotions that are perhaps, those experiences are perhaps grounded in our genetics. You know, I'm not a doctor, a medical doctor, to speak to it, but I have studied psychology, and I know that about the quibble between nature and nurture. How much of what we are is as a result of our nature, or inborn nature, or genetic traits that are things that are linked to even our hormones, things that are linked to our personalities, and how much of it is nurture, how we were raised. So I think with respect to us, both male and female, it is a combination of the two. You know, we are raised in different ways, but we also experience life differently because we are different. You know, and there's this attempt today to almost suggest that men and women aren't different, but we are different. We are different, and in many ways in which we're expected to complement each other. That's a part of God's divine design, that a man and a woman is different because we each bring something different to the table in a relationship, and that is with excellent purpose. Because in each of us, male and female, God is represented, you know. But so just to go back, we've established that vulnerability is important. It helps us, it helps to solidify the relationship and takes it to another level. But as we're currently saying, it's a different experience for men and women. And I'm going to ask Gabriel to speak to his own challenge as a male with the issue of vulnerability. Look, think back, Gabriel. Think back of those days when we first got married. We were really happy.
Yes, we were.
We didn't have everything. You know, we lived in a small apartment. There was a lot we didn't have, but we had each other, and we were really in love and, you know, so happy. But yet there were some times when things didn't go well, you know. I wanted to talk I wanted to talk things through with you. I would wake you up sometimes at
ridiculous hours.
2 and 3 in the morning to settle some argument that we had. I was really not a very considerate person back then. But, you know, I felt we had to talk. And I felt back in those days, as I remember, I felt as if there was a part of yourself that you were hiding from me. Sometimes you would be angry and I couldn't understand what you were angry about. You know, how was it for you as a man living with a woman for the first time? Because, you know, even though you may have had other relationships before, this is the first time you were married, the first time you were living with a woman. How was it for you to get to a place where this tough, macho kind of guy, you know, that is how I saw you, and perhaps still see you in some respects, you know, tough, macho, very much a man's man type of guy that you've been and that you are. How was it for you to come to a place where you could open up yourself to me and not feel as if it was weakening you in any way as a man. You know, how was it like first when you fought against that?
For me, you know, when I think back, I must say that I came from a background where the culture that was created in my home is not the culture that I was looking for when I got married. Hence, I would have brought a lot of what I saw, the people I socialized with, you know, all of that would have created the Gabriel that came to you in that early time of marriage. And I think for me, back then, I wanted to prove. I don't think I knew what being vulnerable was.
Right, and you weren't necessarily consciously doing it,
right.
But you were living your experience.
Right, and I wanted to prove that I want to be the best man for my wife in every respect. So there was that fear that I don't want to do things that is not going to be pleasing to you. But at the same time, I still wanted to show, well, listen, I'm a tough guy.
Yeah.
You know, I don't stand for nonsense. And you just can't come and ask me to do this and expect it to happen immediately. You know, you just can't speak to me anyhow because, hey, I am the man in here now.
Yeah.
Right? And I think a lot of males suffer in that respect because we believe that in the home we are the macho man, the macho person, the boss in the home, and we must dictate that sometimes even audibly for the woman to hear, you know. But it's not what was the best in the relationship, because I came from a background that created within me a lot of anger, a lot of rage,
Yes.
a lot of being stonewalling, being like that iceberg.
I just thought of that exact word. It just passed through my brain.
Yes.
So you picked up on it,
Yeah,
stonewalling.
yeah.
And for those who may not know, you know, stonewalling happens in a relationship. It's a behavior that is mostly practiced by men. When there's an argument, there's a disagreement, and the man just shuts down.
Yeah.
So instead of having a discussion, instead of sharing how he really feels, instead of being open, he stonewalls. He puts up a blockade.
Blockage. Yeah.
Don't come speaking to me. He won't even say that,
Right.
but that's what his body language
Yes,
is conveying.
definitely.
So it's like, don't approach me because I'm unapproachable. You know, he's not saying anything.
Yeah.
So it's not that Gabriel said to me, Denise, don't come and talk to me, or I don't want to talk to you. No, it was that he just went silent.
Yeah.
His-
Is that no entry sign
Yes.
that you would drive towards, and you know you cannot cross?
You cannot cross
Right.
that line, you
Yeah.
know. So, you know, we had a lot of that to navigate in the
Yeah,
early
a
years
lot,
of our
a lot,
marriage
a
with
lot.
Gabriel. As he said, you know, there was some anger, there was some rage, and a lot of this is explained in our book,
Yes.
Journey to One.
Yeah, you need to buy it.
You need to get it, you know, but there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of rage because of things he experienced as a boy, as a teenager, as a
Yeah,
young man.
that's right.
And even though he came into the church and had his very authentic experience with God, and we will perhaps have to have another session
Yes,
just
most
looking
definitely.
at male trauma.
Yes.
Just
yeah.
looking at male trauma.
Because again, if I have to go back and show that for me, I did not know what love is.
That's right.
I knew nothing about love. My mother left me at an early age, so I did not really know what it meant
What love was.
to be loved.
Yeah.
And as a result, the love that I knew could have been one that is more an erotic love,
Yes, dealing with the physical only.
dealing with the physical only, you know, and is only as I navigated marriage with Denise that love began to show itself differently by the way we approach each other, the way how she
Loved you.
loved me. I was trying to find the right word to put
Loved
there.
him. The way I loved on him,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah. But it was not something that was automatic for me, because I never came up seeing love.
Yeah.
So hence I could not
Hence,
demonstrate love
and
as
it was
I should.
difficult for you to be vulnerable.
To be vulnerable,
because, as he said, he wasn't really. Yes, his mom would have loved him. I'm sure she did.
Yes.
And in her bringing him to Barbados, it was a sacrifice on her part. And if you read the book, you'll understand. You know, she brought him to Barbados. It was a sacrifice on her part. She couldn't stay. She went, you know, into another space and left him here. You know, but he had a very difficult time. You know, difficult upbringing. Went through lots of challenges. So there would have been.
You need to read the book.
There would have been a lot of anger. There would have been a lot of hate. Even, let me say that, a lot of hate, you know, that was not articulated on his part. So this is before he met me, you know, so there would have been a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, a lot of disappointment, deep hurt, deep pain that I think would have contributed to a rage that was deep in his spirit. And even though he came to know God, because there was no space to articulate those things back then, men never shared openly about any hurt or pain they went through.
That's right.
I mean, it's now getting en vogue for men to share about hurt and pain and trauma. It's now becoming popular. But back then, it was a no-show, you know. And then even when we first got married, it wasn't popular for women either. I think that came in terms of my own experience. That came into popularity perhaps in the late 80s. Early 90s, people started to talk. Women started to talk. You know, and you might be wondering, well, what does this have to do with vulnerability? What we are suggesting is that if you are unable to articulate your own pain, you are unable to articulate your trauma, you're unable to articulate things that happened to you when you were a child, or things that you experienced as an adolescent, bad relationships even, you were hurt, you were devastated, you were traumatized, maybe something your mother did, or your father, or your grandparents, or your uncle, you know, you were rejected, you were abused, even things that teachers spoke to you at school, or attitudes shown towards you because of a particular school you went to, or because you didn't get through well in school. All kinds of things can happen to us, even in our workplaces. Some of us can experience abuse, and so on. And these things become deposited in our emotional bank. They become deposited in our spirits. You know, and if we are unable to say, well, this is what happened to me. This is something that happened to me and I don't like it. I don't like how these people treated me. I don't like how my mom spoke to me. I don't like how my uncle abused me. I don't like how my father beat me all the time and wouldn't allow me to speak up for myself. I don't like the fact that in school the teacher never listened to me and never called on me. If you are not able to speak about these things that happened to you, that means you are not in touch with yourself. You are not honest with you. You know they happened, or they're buried and they're outside of your memory because you just haven't brought them up. So there are a number of ways in which we can treat to this as individuals. There are things that happen to us that we never bring up. We conveniently forget them because they're just too painful. That's one way. Then sometimes we are aware that they're there. We know they happened there in the recesses of our memory, but we try not to dwell on them. We try not to tell anybody about them because they still cause us pain. So we act as if they aren't there. And then there are those of us who are constantly ruminating on the things that happen. And that's not always healthy either. But I'm just saying that with respect to relationship vulnerability, it starts with self-reflection and honest self-reflection and honest admission of trauma. And it may not always happen in a flash bulb experience where you sit down and say, well, yes, I was raped at 10. Or I was forced to do X at 12, or, you know, this person walked out on me at 18. You might not actually sit down and talk about it like that, but you admit that there's pain. You admit to yourself, you know, I've been hurt and I really need to deal with this stuff. I really need to admit. I need to grieve and I need to forgive. And that is where vulnerability starts, with you as the individual.
Yeah, I was just going to say that because you may even find the person who have buried that pain and they do not want to voice it. So what they do as a couple is create a facade and present themselves in a way as though everything is good.
It's okay when it's
Everything
not.
is fine.
Yeah.
When deep down inside, you just do not know how to voice your pain,
That's
because
right.
it is not something that you have seen. It's not something that you came up hearing
Other people do.
Other
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
right? So as a result, it becomes difficult to be vulnerable to your spouse.
Yeah.
It becomes difficult, and is only over time as whether it be your wife or whether it be yourself, as Denise is saying, start chipping away at that old block on the inside, then the real you starts to come on and say, hey, I need to voice this, because if I voice this, you know, the healing is going to start to take place.
That's right.
You know, and it is only at that point that you would understand, well, hey, me as a person need help.
Okay, we'll be right back, where I'll be looking more closely at a very personal example of the absence of vulnerability at a point in time in our relationship, and what it could have done if I had only known. And we're back. Okay, so early in our marriage, we got married in 1984. We had our first child in 1986,
Yeah.
2 years later. And obviously, you know, having your first baby is really a happy time.
Yeah.
We've always wanted children, so having that first child together was a beautiful experience for the
Yes.
two of us. You know, we felt bonded together. You know, we felt, you know, this is what we wanted. We have a baby. He was a boy, right? I was happy. I was over the moon. But I noticed that at some point when I was, you know, at home taking care of our son, because I was a student then still at the university. I was in my final year.
Yeah,
I had
that's
one
right.
course to repeat. And I was therefore able to be at home with him and take care of him while my husband worked and you know, brought home the bacon, as it were. You know, but I noticed that at some point I felt a little distance from him. The baby was still relatively new.
Yeah.
So he was born in October, and it was in those first months, those first 3-4 months, you know, and I felt a bit of distance from my husband. I couldn't put my finger on what it was, and I don't think I was mature enough to ask him what was wrong. I just felt that something was wrong, but I couldn't nail what was wrong. I just felt him pulling away a bit. I know he spent a lot of time, you know, just talking to friends and so on. But I just felt that there was this distance between us. But Gabriel, I want you to share with our listeners what was really happening with you at that moment. I only found this out when we wrote the book.
my son is all grown now, you know, but one of the things that, you know, I loved was the fact that here...
Before he goes any further, my husband was and always has been a fantastic father. Just let me put that out there.
I was saying that one of the things that I loved was the fact that there we have someone that belongs to us.
The two of us.
That came from the two of us. And one of the things I was glad about is that we even named him Gabriel.
Yes, right.
Right? But when I look back, and it's just when we was looking at writing the book that this came out, you know, and again, because of the inability to be vulnerable in those stages,
Those early stages
of marriage, you know, these things would occur, you know. The baby, yes, he's there, he is ours, but he has replaced me as an individual. What am I saying? I could come home when the baby's not there, and the kind of love that would be showered to me from my wife, I mean, I loved it. But now, the boy is sharing the love that should come to me and so much so, and I'm going to be frank. I'm going to be frank. When I saw him, I say, he's amazing. Look, the man even have the breast that I love in his mouth. Right? So,
oh my gosh.
So there you're seeing, you know, I'm being neglected. That's the way
That's
how
how
I
he
felt.
felt. That's how he felt.
I felt neglected, and more attention is being paid to the child, and for me, it seemed as though no kind of attention was being resolved for me. So as a result, you know, I started just being out, being away, not wanting to communicate, and the communication that I would desire, it didn't stem from the home, but outside of the home, you know, and I think that drove me away from my family.
And it wasn't something that I actually recognized in that way, because for all intents and purposes, Gabriel was the extremely attentive dad.
And because I would do what I have to do.
Yeah, and he loved his son. He came home. He took over from me. You know, the one thing I could say about my husband is that he was never one of these fathers who left everything up to me, even though I was full-time mother at home.
I knew about babies.
Yeah.
I knew how to take care of babies because I took care of some of my cousins, you know, some of my second cousins.
Yeah.
You know, so as a result, when Nikolai came along, you know, it was easy.
It was like hand in glove.
It was like hand in glove.
He really knew more about babies than I did. And, you know, so I never had an issue with that. I just want to make that clear. He was very involved. You know, he changed him. He fed him from the bottle because we did both bottle and breast at the time, you know. And he fed him. He bathed him. You know, he threw him up in the air when he was firm enough for that to happen.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right. We had lots of fun.
Lots of fun, lots of relationship going on between him and his son. But I never knew how he felt. I never knew that he felt neglected. I never knew that he went through a period of feeling as if I was paying more attention. And this is something that happens in relationships, and it is to be expected.
Yeah.
When you have a child or you have children, it will change the dynamics of the relationship. And it is something that we don't necessarily talk about. When I say we don't necessarily talk about, you might get married and say, okay, we want X children, Y children. We used to say we wanted 7, then we used to say we wanted 5, and we ended up with 3. And to this day, I'm always saying, I'm sorry, I didn't have more, you know? Because we always love children. That's not the point. But we always love children, you know? But the point is, we were both happy to be parents, but I never knew that my husband felt neglected. And if I had known, perhaps we would have been able to have the conversation. I would have been able to reassure him of my love, reassure him of my commitment, and that type of thing, because sometimes these things are just fleeting thoughts, intrusive thoughts that enter our minds, and then because we don't articulate them and we don't get a chance to really talk them out, they become larger than life, and then they take on a whole different shape and form. They fester, and you know, other thoughts start being added to them, and then the whole thing becomes really ugly. And this can relate to any aspect of a relationship, even with respect to me as a wife. You know, I might feel, well, my husband isn't showing me the love I want him to show me, which is a feeling I had very often in the early years of our marriage. You know, I would say, well, that's the thing about me. I was a lot more open.
Open, yes.
I really was a lot more open. I would often talk. So the way that I am now, I think I've always been this way. I've perhaps gotten more like this as I got older, but I've always been a talker.
She's just tapered a bit now because she's not going to wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning anymore.
No, I won't. But I've always been a talker. And if I didn't feel loved, I would tell Gabriel. If I needed him to say, remember those days? You need to say I love you. You know, he used to say it, but if I felt I needed to hear it more, I would tell him. Or I would tell him I need him to be more romantic. So I was always open to sharing how I felt, most of the time. There were times when I did keep certain things quiet to myself as well, because they were either too painful, or I was afraid that if I were more vulnerable, that he wouldn't understand, and therefore I would keep those things to myself. And you know, some of those things are things I spoke to him about later as well, as we grew in our relationship. You know, there were things that I exposed to him that I may not have exposed to him when I was younger. So it went both ways. But generally speaking, I was more open as a woman who was often reading and, reading all the psychology stuff and the relationship stuff and getting a lot of knowledge about how a relationship should be navigated. I really was doing a lot of this from very, very young. So God leading us into this type of ministry should really not have been a surprise to us. And my husband as well, even though he may have been slower to come along, we've always been that couple that others would turn to and ask. It's amazing. It's amazing, While we were even navigating our own stuff, there would be others younger than us, younger in marriage or not yet married, that would come to us and ask us to help or share their stories with us. So we've been doing this for such a long time, and we don't want to suggest in any way that we have arrived or
we haven't.
Or that we are ultra vulnerable and we've done it all, exposed it all. No, this is a journey.
Yeah, it's a work that we have to keep.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Because what happens sometimes is the thing is, you can get so accustomed as well. When you've been married for a while, you can get so accustomed to being together and to working your relationship together that you think, well, there's nothing left for me to share. Yeah. There's nothing left for me to expose. He knows it all. He knows me inside out. What new? What else do I need to share? But the point is, as we get older, as we navigate different decades, of our lives, we go through different levels of vulnerability because life changes as we get older.
Especially for women.
Yeah, life changes.
It is a whole new ball game now that my wife has reached the age that she's at.
Yeah,
that's another discussion
that we will have when we start to look at perimenopause and menopause and that type of thing. But that's true, and it's true for men too, but maybe in a different way. But it's still true for men. Men and women, we all go through changes, and we always have to keep recalibrating and looking back. Am I being open enough with my spouse? Am I sharing how I really feel about this thing? Do I like how he's treating me? Do I like how she's treating me in this moment, in this space that I'm in, at this juncture of my life? When my career is at this particular point and I'm going through this thing, when I've lost my job, when I've decided to start a new business, when I've decided to, just do something different with myself. Maybe I'm going to the gym. I want to look different. I want to, do life differently because I'm older now. I'm wiser now. I'm questioning myself more. I'm challenging myself more. Is he here with me? Yeah. Is she there with me?
Yes.
And the only way that we can be there at the various moments with each other is if we are open with each other and we're vulnerable and we're honest and we share our fears, we share our challenges. So as we wrap up, when we come right back, we'll be looking at how we can develop this spirit of vulnerability to make our marriages stronger and deeper. We'll be right back.
And we're back.
We've been talking about relationship vulnerability and of the need for us to really strengthen this aspect of our relationships. We started out by defining vulnerability. We looked at how it is different for men and women. We shared some of our personal experiences. And now we're going to wrap up by looking at how can we strengthen this area in our marriages? How can we strengthen this area in our personal relationships? Because I believe that vulnerability isn't something that just belongs to marriage, but even pre-marriage. As you prepare to marry, as you court that person, as you walk in a relationship with that person that you plan to spend the rest of your life with, I think you start it from then. But obviously it kicks up a notch after marriage, because marriage is that significant relationship, that significant bond, that significant covenant. So how do we walk in vulnerability in our marriage relationships? I mean, it's not rocket science. Just do it. Just do it.
I love that.
Make that decision that you are going to be different because you've thought about it, you've listened to us, you've looked at your own relationship, and you've made the evaluation that this relationship needs to be stronger, it needs to be better, it needs to be more solid. We need to be closer, we need to be more intimate.
Spend more time together.
And that's an avenue. How do we do that?
How we do that?
We do that by spending time together, spending quality time together. Yes. Be deliberate about it. You guys know, for those of you who follow us on social media, you know that we spend a lot of time dating. We try to date at least once a week. Mostly we do it once a week. Sometimes we go otherwise. But it's important that when we do, it's important to do that.
Yes,
So it's
definitely.
important to date.
Yeah.
It's important to carve out special time. You don't always have to go out. You can do it at home if you have space and if you have privacy that you can just be alone.
And if you have to plan it in order to make it work because of the busy schedule that both of you may have, plan it.
Plan
you know,
it.
Don't just take it for granted. Well, listen, I'm working, he's working, she's working. No, there has to be some measure of planning to come together in order to solidify the fact that, hey, marriage is not just something that we are in a house with.
That's right.
But rather, it is something that we must work together about.
And as we look at it with respect to vulnerability now, as we spend that time dating, because it's not just about going on a date, but I'm thinking that that space is an excellent space to have tough conversations.
Conversation, yes.
Have tough conversations. Not saying to spoil your night, if you get what I mean, but you know, have those tough conversations. Let it be a space and a moment where you can be drawn closer to each other because you're questioning each other, you're talking to each other. You know, it's not about accusing anybody of anything. It's not about being accusatory. It's not about being harsh, but you're sharing from your heart. You know, you are opening yourself up. You're saying to your partner, you know, babe, you know, hon, you know, this is something that has been bothering me for a long time, or I wish that you would blah, 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 blah. You know, I wish that you would spend more time talking to me. I wish you would make love to me more often. You know, I told my husband today that sometimes men always complain about not getting enough sex. You know, that's a very common complaint that I hear from husbands. You know, the sexual relationship isn't what they want. And their idea of dealing with it is perhaps to be grumpy, you know, to have an attitude with their wives, or, you know, to just maybe tackle her in bed, you know, because you want more sex. Yeah. But they never think of going the other route of really telling her how they feel when they don't connect sexually. How many of you husbands really let your wife know how it makes you feel? Have you ever thought of saying to your wife, you know, babe, when we don't connect sexually, I miss you. I miss your body. I feel as if a part of me is missing. I love to connect with you because it makes me feel so complete as a man. It makes me feel like I can show you how much I love you. Which man you know does that? I mean, men tend not to get that deep with their sharing about missing sexual intimacy. And we'll talk about this another time all by itself. But I'm just giving some examples.
Yes.
You know, so that whole thing about, but if you're not comfortable even admitting that to yourself, as I said earlier, you can't admit to yourself, you know what? When I don't connect with my wife sexually, I really miss her. I don't just miss her body, but I miss her
presence.
I miss her presence. She's such a beautiful person that when we make love, it makes me feel so close to her, and that's why I want to be with her physically. Are you even aware that that's what you're feeling? Have you admitted that to yourself, much less admitted it to her? You know, and what about you wives? Can you say to your spouse, you know, if you spend time massaging my feet, or you spend time massaging my back, or you spend time buying me flowers, or you send me a poem, or you buy me an old-fashioned postcard. I know we're all digital now. Everything is our phone. But you know, there's still postcards that are sold in town. There's still Hallmark and other brands of postcards. You know, so babe, you know, if you had to buy me a postcard and put a rose inside of it, or I came home from work and I found petals on the floor and 2 glasses of wine, red wine, and I would feel so loved by you. I don't expect you're going to do this every day or every week, but if you had to just do it just once in a while, I would feel so loved by you. If you would just say, well, babe, this time is your time. Come, let's chat. Let's chat.
Let's put down the phones and let's just chat.
Let's chat. What's going on? How was your day? How has your day been? You know, how can I be of service to you? You know, let me do your feet. Let me massage those toes and paint your nails. And you know, these are things that you might think, oh, they seem so plasticky, they seem so surfacey, but these are the things that we desire. Men desire a lot of sex, and I'm not saying women don't desire sex too, but we as women, we desire lots of emotional intimacy. But are we really telling each other? Are we really vulnerable enough to let each other know how we really feel? So I'm just saying, just do it. Make the time. Jolt yourself into being honest. Be honest with you first. If being honest is a chore or it's difficult, try journaling. Try writing it down. Writing or journaling is a fantastic way of honesty, of self-honesty.
Yeah.
Talk to yourself. There's nothing wrong with talking to yourself, no matter what you hear people say. You know, go into a room alone. If writing is a challenge for you, use your phone, do a voice note where you talk to yourself and play it back and see if you understand what you're saying, what you have just said to yourself. You know, practice being open with you.
Yeah.
Right. Journaling is excellent for self-honesty and self-reflection. Voice note. That's another strategy for being honest with yourself. And when you begin to practice being honest with you, then it becomes easier for you to be honest with your spouse. Don't hide. Expose.
And the same things that you would share with your girlfriends when you all get together.
If you're a lady.
If you're a lady, that is. Mm-hmm. The same thing that you would share with them that you want to see happen.
In your marriage.
Don't just tell them.
Tell your husband.
Tell your spouse.
Man. Let him know.
Guys, don't just ignore the way how you're feeling and say, well, listen, I'm going to go down by the boys and just play dominoes because I want to just get this out of me. No. Let your wife know what you desire.
And if you feel neglected, tell her.
If you feel neglected,
tell her.
Voice it to her.
That's right.
Right? Because that's the only way things are going to change. That's the only way you will be able to look into the mirror and not only see yourself, but when you see yourself, you see your spouse.
That's right. Because the two shall become one. So, you know, marriage is not a competition. It's not about one-upmanship. It's not about, you know, one person trying to railroad the other and always have his or her own way. That's not what it's about.
No.
It's about meeting each other halfway, desiring each other.
50-50.
Not even 50-50.
70-30.
60-40.
60-40. Yeah.
Sometimes
80-20.
Sometimes 90-10.
Yes.
You know, and that doesn't belong. Those percentages don't belong to any one person.
That's right.
You know, so sometimes one of you is carrying the relationship more than the next.
Yeah.
That happens, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay, because if you each love each other, then that is to be expected. There are times when the relationship is going to be carried more by one of you than the next.
Yes.
But you never measure, you never compare, because each of you is committed 100%. Yeah? So we hope that what we shared with you this evening, all about relationship vulnerability, will help you to grow as an individual. If you're not yet married, hopefully what we've shared tonight would help you to understand what you need to do and what you need to learn and understand even as you prepare for marriage, or even if you think of marriage. You might not yet be in a relationship. And definitely for those of you who are already married, we're hoping that what we've shared tonight will help you in your marriage, in your relationship, to be stronger. So thank you for joining us for this first episode of Strong Love Speaks.
Yes.
Join us for our second episode coming up soon. Strong Love Speaks. Good night.
Good night.